Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Camp Cryptid. I'm your host, Erica Fett. And first off, I'd like to start off with thanking everyone times a million for tuning in to the last episode all about the cryptids that turned out to be real. It was really fun doing an entire episode based on actual animals that exist that were once on the cryptid list, and also to kind of tie in a little bit of cryptids to Camp Cryptid. And it's always crazy to think about animals that seem so absolutely normal to us. But at one point, those stories of those animals were thought to be myths or even considered hoaxes at the time. So it's really fun to kind of dive into cryptids. I just love the idea of cryptids. I love the idea of all of these crazy animals maybe existing, maybe not existing. Who knows? But it's still fun to talk about and chat about. So thanks so much to everybody who tuned in for that episode. Also, I had an amazing time at Merry Krampus in Columbus, Ohio. I'm from Columbus, so getting to do local markets and talk to people at the Merry Krampus was so much fun. Some of you had amazing stories. You talked to me all about all of the crazy, cool hauntings around and all of the topics I should do in the future. So thank you all so much for stopping by and saying hi. And also, I'm so excited that everybody was so pumped about the cryptid camp cards. So thanks so much for everyone's just joy and happiness. It really, honestly, it brought so much life to me. So thank you so much. But so we're in the holiday season, right? It was Merry Krampus last weekend or the weekend before. And we are literally a week and a half out to Christmas, which is nuts. How is it already December? But I honestly, for the holidays, I wanted to have an episode dedicated to vampires since, Nosferatu is dropping on Christmas, which I'm so excited. My husband's taking me to see. I'm so happy. I'm that sarcophagus popcorn bucket is going to be mine. And I saw that they were actually doing a sarcophagus replica on the actual website where it's $20,000. Now that would be a really cool prop, but it's the price of a car, right? Like a normal car. So probably not in my future anytime soon, but hey, a girl can dream, right? I'm a huge Dracula fan. And so having anything to do with vampires and Nosferatu is just so cool. But I have been a lifelong fan of vampires, and anyone who knows me knows, I am for sure 100% a vampire girl. I love me some werewolves, do not get me wrong. I am an equal opportunity for all monsters, but vampires are my thing. And, whether it was growing up and reading Bram Stoker's Dracula and then seeing it come to life within films like Nosferatu, Dracula, Bride of Dracula, I was always hooked. But as I got older, the thought of vampires kind of just always stuck with me. And with amazing shows like True Blood and Twilight and, Anne Rice, the stories of Anne Rice, how could you not be obsessed with vampires? But vampires have so many representations, right? They could be a rich prince. They could be insanely wealthy and just so cool and suave. Or, in some cases like True Blood, they're just a normal everyday person that just happened to be bitten by a vampire who's running a vampire bar down the road, right? So it's really fun to see vampires represented throughout media and stories. And like I said, whether it's someone who is living in a castle or they're deep in the swamps of Louisiana, vampires are represented in so many ways. But even with the different representations of vampires, there's one thing that always sticks with vampires, and that is the sex appeal and lust factors that still exist, right? That's something that just goes hand in hand. It's just one of those things that vampires are just, they're sexy creatures. And while Bram Stoker definitely brought romanticism to the vampire a bit more due to the popularity of Dracula, the love story, it was beautiful. I loved it. There's tons of quotes that I've used with my husband over the years, so he knows. The idea of vampires have existed thousands of years before that. Even before Mesopotamian, Greek, Roman, Slavic mythology, vampires have existed since pretty much the beginning of time. But like I said, vampires come in all shapes and forms and with stories all over the world. So today I wanted to talk about a couple of my favorite vampire stories. And especially with Nosferatu month, we're kind of just kicking it off. We have to do more vampire stuff. And that's why I really wanted to touch on two or three, maybe two of my favorite stories of vampires. So I can't wait. Now, to start off my list is the Blood Countess, Elizabeth Bathory. And this is one that I grew up reading legends about and I always thought was like so crazy, scary, but also like so gnarly and metal. And it's just like thinking of like a story like that, that's like so wild. Now, supposedly the legends of her cruelty started when she was disciplining a servant, right? And Elizabeth Bathory was a noblewoman in about the 1500s in Hungary. And her family, she was born into wealth, right, of course. And she was tucked away in this beautiful castle in Hungary. Well, supposedly she became very cruel when she was disciplining a servant. And when she was disciplining the servant, the blood got on her face. And as she walked over to a mirror to kind of wipe the blood away, she stopped and she looked at herself. And she looked at herself in the mirror and she thought, wow, this red blood really makes my face pop. She noticed how the red, bright blood made her pale face and her skin seem younger, brighter, and more youthful. And when she noticed that this blood made the appearance of her skin look younger and more vibrant, she thought, oh, I might be onto something. So this began her reign of terror and torture. She was accompanied by a few of her very loyal servants to essentially assist in gathering a ton of young women around the area. And once those young women were inside of her castle, the real terror began. She would torture these young girls and drain their blood, and then she would even bathe in the blood. And stories started to leak. More and more girls started becoming missing. I mean, we're talking like hundreds of girls that she took. And as these stories started to circulate, people were starting to talk a little bit more and like, well, we are noticing there's a lot of girls missing. We don't know what's going on. And as people started looking into it, they realized, wow, we really think that something's going on. And then she was captured. Basically, once they realized the real terror that was going on, and she was found guilty. And as a punishment, they actually bricked her up inside of a room inside of her castle. So she spent out the last couple years of her life just living in solitude, bricked up inside rooms inside of her castle. So it's kind of a crazy story, but Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess. Now, since this happened in like the 1500s, a lot of people are like, well, you know, we don't really necessarily have proof, right, that these are actually things that happen. We don't have proof that she like bathed in the blood, right? There are newspaper clippings from like the 1700s that talk about her and, like the legends, right? But it's a game of telephone when it comes to these earlier stories in history. So the thing is a lot of people also speculate, well, maybe she never really like bathed in blood. Maybe this was just an attempt at the local people in the area to get rid of her, to get her out of power so that they could have her wealth. Because, I mean, let's be real, like in human history, that's definitely a thing that happened a couple times. So there are these like little discrepancies within the Blood Countess story. But as it goes as a legend, right, she bathed in the blood of hundreds of young girls and tortured them with her loyal servants in her castle in Hungary. So I'll leave that up to you. Now, one of my absolute favorite stories of vampires. This one right here is hands down, probably one of the stories that when I learned about it, I was excited. I was so pumped. I was like, okay, this I can get behind, right? And that is the story of the Count of Saint Germain. So the Count of Saint Germain, or Jacques Saint Germain, which we'll get into later, is basically one of my favorite stories of any real life vampire. And it's got a bit of alchemy, it's got some magic, it's got mysticism, and it's got vampires. So like I said, what more could you possibly ask for? Now, this story does have two parts, so buckle up and enjoy this ride. Now, this little story starts in the 18th century in France, when the Count of Saint Germain was very well known and a very affluent member of high society. Now, the Count of Saint Germain told people that he was around that he was the son of Franz Leopold, or Prince Regasi, in Transylvania. Now, Saint Germain was not only associated with King Louis XV of France, he was also affiliated with many other notable people of that time period. We're talking like Voltaire, Mozart, Casanova, and the Prince of Wales. So this man, Saint Germain, was well known by many, many people. Saint Germain was a self-professed adventurer. He was a student of mysticism, and he could charm people and talk for hours. Stories of Saint Germain said that he was a man whose knowledge knew no bounds. He was charismatic. He could pick up any musical instrument and play. In fact, he actually wrote many songs and composed a lot of music while he was alive, which you can actually still go listen to this day. Basically, the story is he could charm anyone. He could talk in several different languages very well, very proficiently, and he was also very deep into alchemy. He would often talk about knowing the secrets to preserving beauty over time and eternal life. Aside from being just this man who could do everything and charm everybody, he honestly, when it came down to it, this is someone that when you imagine like a dinner table and people talking, this is someone who led the conversation. This is someone who people looked around, who people wanted to be around. People gravitated towards this person. He was very charismatic. He was supposedly very kind and, very well known. Like anybody around this time period knew who this guy was, and if you associate with him, you were someone of importance. Saint Germain was a man who was kind of pale with dark black hair. He always dressed simply, but very, very like stylish. He always had expensive jewels on his fingers like diamonds. In fact, there was a story about how his belt or his shoe buckles had like gems that were worth like 200,000 francs at the time, which was a lot of money. So people noted that this man, he did dress simply, but he was always like to the T. But here's where it gets a little bit more strange. He told people he was over 300 years old at one point. And many stories of Saint Germain over the years basically said that when people noted he would be talking about his stories at dinner, they would notice he would talk, but he would never eat with people. They never saw him eat. They never saw him drink. In fact, there's a quote that says that he ate no meat and drank no wine. And there are many accounts from many people around the period who talked about him who said this of him, that he never ate around people. Like no one ever saw this man eat. And another thing that's kind of weird and strange about Saint Germain is that he told people that he could summon spirits and he could summon supernatural beings and just have chats with them. He could basically summon them at any point and he could chat with them. So you got this layer of, right, this person who just has all of this knowledge. He's told people he's over 300 years old. He said he's the son of a Transylvanian prince. And he is just one of those people who just people like to be around. People gravitate towards him. He was incredibly suave, right? He was smooth. He was very creative. And he even, here's one of my favorite little tidbits of this. He even wrote a book called The Triangular Book of Saint Germain. And it's a manuscript, and it was written in code, and the book itself is actually shaped in a triangle. And if you look it up, it looks really cool. And that's also why this story is like has so many different elements, because I'm literally trying to give you guys like the condensed version of this, but I read an entire like 300-page book on this man. And I was so entertained, and I just kept telling my husband like, oh my God, this, and I showed him the book, and I was like trying to find copies of this book because I desperately want one. But there's this triangular book that he actually wrote that came with like this little metal, I don't want to say like compass, but it's like a pendant almost that helps you. But basically, when people went to decode this book, it was the magical spells on how to gain like treasure and how to give yourself eternal life. And it is definitely an interesting book. So I would highly recommend, if you get a second of your day, go look up the Triangular Manuscript of Saint Germain, and then tell me when you're listening to all of this weird stuff about him, tell me that this is not a cool story. I love this story, and I want everything Saint Germain because I'm obsessed. Okay, definitely go look at it because it's cool as hell. But anyways, so like I said, once they decoded this book that he wrote, it gives magical spells on how to have treasure and how to have eternal life, which is so strange. Also noted, he was a Freemason. So there's another little level of like fun, weird, like conspiracy stuff. Definitely this was someone who was in every aspect of the time of like secret societies. This man was in pretty much everything. So time goes on, right? Saint Germain is living his life. He's being a diplomat to the French court, Louis XV. He is traveling all around, doing all of these different types of being an ambassador to France. But since he was a diplomat at the time, and obviously these were times of very much political unrest in Europe, you know, you have many revolutions, you have people unhappy with monarchies, you have different struggles for power, and he got caught up in a little bit of a crazy political scene back then, and he had to leave under a blank passport, basically, or they were going to arrest him. So basically, he left under this passport. He could travel safely under any name. And just to go real quick too, traveling under different names at the time, especially in Europe, wasn't something that was abnormal. A lot of people did it. He traveled around Europe for what seemed to be years before finding a spot around Germany where he stayed. And of course, he was surrounded by German royalty because Saint Germain. And this is also where he dabbled in a bit more Freemason stuff and the Illuminati before he supposedly died in 1784. But I say supposedly. Now, here's where it also gets weird, okay? So there are many sightings of him well after the early 1800s where people recalled seeing him 50 years earlier in different cities and him looking the same. Younger. There are also people who placed him, after they had seen him multiple times over the course of a century, placed him to being over 100 years old. There are many different diary entries as well from people who knew him. So even basically, having a diary back then and a journal was something that a lot of people practiced. It was just a way that they could document things. So a lot of these stories about Saint Germain are actually taken from actual diary entries of people who were in royalty, people who were in charge, commanders, people in the military. So we have a lot of documentation that he actually existed. In fact, there's actual newspaper articles that actually mention him and almost getting arrested because people thought he was a spy at one point. So we know that Saint Germain absolutely existed. There's no doubt in our minds this is a man who did exist. But who he was and if he was this man of magic and mystery is the question, right? We know this was a man who we don't really know where he came from. We just know that he says he was the son of a prince in Transylvania. So of course you add Transylvania in there, it automatically gets creepy, right? But we also know that this is someone who was well-versed. He was wealthy. He could afford to learn all of these things. He could afford to travel. He could afford to buy nice things and be around royalty, because this isn't like this is someone who could just go up to royalty and fit in. No, this is someone who obviously fit into many different royal families. So we have actually stories from diaries from even Marie Antoinette before she was executed, basically where there were stories that after he died, he was basically corresponding with members of her court, warning them of the inevitable, fate of the French monarchy. And there are stories of him basically coming and warning them, even after he died, which people were like, how is he contacting people he's supposedly dead? He was even noted after his death to attend some Masonic gatherings where he was even documented as attending. So if you go to these logs of Masonic gatherings after he passed away, it notes him being there. So this was someone who was very well known, like I said, amongst the Masons and the aristocracy at the time. So this is someone who wouldn't have been confused. And this is someone also who, he had a reputation. People knew exactly who he was right when he walked into a room because of this reputation that preceded him. So it would have been very hard for people at the time, especially knowing how involved he was in these little circles, to mistake him or to mistake someone else for him, especially when logging his attendance at these things. So there's also like weird conversations that people noted in their journals where they said that they talked to Saint Germain and he would tell them like, you won't see me again for another 85 years, or I'm going to the Himalayas, I need to rest for a while, or it was really weird. There's even a thing where he was supposedly meeting with a girl in a chapel after he passed away, and there was only one way to get into this chapel, and as the girl left after meeting with Saint Germain, she asked her carriage driver, oh, did you see him? Did you see him? He said, no one's left. So there were stories that he could appear and disappear at any time too. So this has so many levels of like weird but cool, but like what the shit is going on? So it's just, this is why I say this is one of my favorite stories. And honestly, I will say you can read the book that was published, I believe, in around like 1912. It's got all of the diary entries. It's got correspondence between other members of other societies referring to him. So it is definitely something that you should probably, if you are intrigued by this story, you want to read more about Saint Germain, I definitely recommend it. So I'll make sure to post it in the Camp Cryptid Reddit so you guys can read it, because I believe you can read it for free, because that's what I did. I was like, I'm pretty sure I actually have a copy of the book and I could not find it. So I was like, I'm just going to read this. And it was so interesting to read all of the different stories about him from all of these people from all of these different countries. So definitely bizarre. But speaking of bizarre, this brings me to my second part of the story about Saint Germain, and this gets into the vampirism. I love it. So, New Orleans, early 1900s. Let's set the tone. You're talking about this beautiful French Quarter. You've got these beautiful houses. It's a great time for immigration within New Orleans. And this is where a very charismatic and well-versed and well-traveled man named Jacques Saint Germain comes into the picture, into New Orleans. And this man was very well known. He threw lavish parties at his residence on Royal Street, I believe is where it's located these days, because it's still there. The house that he supposedly lived in is still in New Orleans. And he would charm people with his stories from all of his travels all over the world. And he would play instruments, and he knew lots of languages, and he was known to throw these parties, but he would never eat or drink at these parties. But even though he wouldn't eat or drink at these parties, it added to the mystery around Jacques Saint Germain. So people just went with it. They were like, oh, this very cool dude is throwing these amazing parties. Hell yeah. So people didn't question it. People just went with it. This was a time of, people just living it up, right? But that was until one night, a girl showed up at the hospital after saying she jumped from a balcony from Saint Germain's home. And when asked why she would jump from the balcony, she said, he tried to bite my neck. So she's like, in order to escape, I jumped from the balcony, and that's when I was brought into the hospital. Now, when she told the local authorities that, he tried to assault her, they were like, oh, I don't know, we'll go talk to Saint Germain. Because of course, since he threw these parties and, members of the police force probably knew him, they just showed up and they were like, hey, Jacques, so we had this story about a girl who said that you tried to bite her and she fell from your balcony and she's in the hospital right now. Well, Jacques, being, the suave person he is, he said, listen, total misunderstanding. Listen, I'm really busy right now, but if you guys come back, I'll be happy to talk about anything, clear this misunderstanding up. No biggie, just show up later. We'll get it handled. So the police, knowing Jacques Saint Germain, they were like, oh, okay, no problem. We'll show up later, right? We'll come back. We'll get this figured out. Well, when the cops came back to have, a further conversation about this, everything in the residence was gone. There was no trace of Jacques Saint Germain. He had left the city, and the only thing that was left in the house was a bottle of wine. And when the cops decided, they were like, oh, let's taste this fancy wine, right? Like, okay, he left us some wine. They realized that the wine was mixed with human blood. Vampires. The crazy thing about Jacques Saint Germain is that when he was telling his stories, he told people that he was a Count of Saint Germain. He told people that was him and he was just in New Orleans now. So there's a second layer to this story of him living longer and showing up, 85 years later, like he told people he would. We're talking like it was around the same period that he told people he would reappear. And we also know that traveling under a different name wasn't something that was uncommon back then. It is a little peculiar that, Jacques Saint Germain says that he was the Count of Saint Germain. He has the same look. He's someone who was very well versed in speaking different languages. He was someone who basically just people gravitated towards, even in New Orleans. I mean, this guy was rocking it out no matter where he went. So it is really cool that he could just basically lead a conversation, and he would never eat with people. He would just kind of be around the dinner table having banter with people. He would never eat, never drink. So I think that is very, very interesting. Now, his presence in New Orleans isn't really completely proven, though, I will say. I do know that I have tried numerous times to look and scour like newspapers.com, looking for different information about him. You would think if this is someone who was like very well known, right, in New Orleans, and he just showed up and started throwing parties and was like a high member of society, and then all of a sudden this like, I don't want to say like incident with him happens where a girl falls out of his balcony, says he like assaulted her, and then he just leaves. You would think that would be something that would be like very like, talked about in the newspaper or something to that extent. But I could not find much. And I know some people have tried to find information about the people who owned the house that he supposedly lived at, and there's no documentation of him ever owning the house. To my knowledge. But it is an interesting story because it's just a legend in New Orleans, and it is very strange that there's this whole entire legend that would just be made up. That's that like peculiar, that spot on, that, has that tie to Count Saint Germain. So I don't know. When it comes down to it, I love the idea of someone being just like so into alchemy and magic and everything and just able to just be eternal, whatever. I'm into it. And like I said earlier, when it comes to this story, if you do get a second, definitely look at that triangular manuscript and then tell me if you don't think this dude's a vampire. Like straight up. I just think this story is one of my favorites. I just love this story. And honestly, like I said, this is someone, we do know the Count of Saint Germain existed. We do know that he was affiliated with Louis XV. We know that he was associated with the monarchy. We know that he was associated with many people of high importance back then. So this is someone who had the means to travel. He had the means to get over to whatever country he needed to go to. This is someone who basically had friends in all different types of places. And if he showed up in New Orleans and assumed a different name under Jacques Saint Germain, that's a mystery. And I think it's a really cool mystery. But this is one mystery that I think that is like really fun. And like I said, if you get a second today, after you listen to this and you want to read more into it, I definitely recommend reading into it because this is a really cool story. It's some crazy stuff. But honestly, like if you are into like cool stories and you just need something to occupy your afternoon, definitely read into this. Like I said, I will link the entire book for you all to read. There's tons of literature about Saint Germain, though, because he is someone who's also depicted in a lot of different popular media to this day. So I think it's really cool. I think Castlevania, I think he might be in Castlevania. I can't remember. But there are lots of people in like vampire stories who are named after him. So I don't know. I love the idea. And if Saint Germain still exists, do it. That's amazing, boo. Keep living your life. I mean, it is just so cool. It's like I said, it's one of my favorite stories, but I'll leave this one up to your imagination on if you think this is real or if you think this guy could really exist or if you think this is hogwash. I love vampire stories. And the fact that there's like this story in New Orleans, 100%, which honestly, like I went to New Orleans a few years ago, prior to COVID, and I did the ghost tour and they talked about Saint Germain and you got to walk in front of the house that he supposedly lived at. And there's balconies. Yeah, for sure. Like, so, okay, that's true. But they, there's different variations to the stories too, because over time, obviously, since it's not like super well documented, there's no way to actually prove, a certain story is the way it went down. But yeah, it is. if you go to New Orleans, I 100% recommend being a tourist 100% and doing one of the ghost tours, because there's a lot of little tidbits of vampires in New Orleans. Like there's a vampire tree where a guy was buried under it. They started seeing him. I don't know. It's really cool. New Orleans is like the hub for vampires. We all know that from, Interview with a Vampire, and it's just got a vampire feel to it. Totally. Like when you're walking around, you're like, okay, if I was a vampire, I would go to New Orleans 100%. Which is also like why I love True Blood, because it's not in New Orleans. I think it's still set in Louisiana, but it's, the Southern girl in me is like, yes, I love this. Count Saint Germain. I hope you guys enjoyed it. That's probably like my favorite vampire story. And like I said, this one is like mixed with reality and a little bit of like mystery. So it's like, what wouldn't you love about a vampire mystery, right? If this really happened, this is wild. And if anybody can find, here's the thing, listening, if anybody's like a sleuth and can find anything about him, I bow to you, because that would be amazing. I love this story. This is one of my favorites. And like I said, I've been trying to get my hands on one of these triangular manuscripts, because like I'm a book collector, and like this would be like a cornerstone of my books. I need it. If anybody has an extra triangular manuscript, just send it to me. But yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed the little story of Count of Saint Germain and the Blood Countess. Like I said, I don't know if, I should have looked this up, and I'm so sorry I wasn't more prepared. But I should have looked up if you can go to Hungary and visit her castle, Elizabeth Bathory's castle. Because if you could still go visit that castle to this day, that might be kind of a cool, weird, scary thing to go do. Oh, also, little side note, one real cool thing that I realized. So you know how you're supposed to like kill vampires with a stake, right? With like wood. Supposedly, you can't just use any wood. It's like a specific type of wood. So there's a couple different types of wood. I want to say one was like hawthorn. I can't remember the other one. But yeah, that's the only way you could supposedly kill a vampire back in those days, is to have that specific type of wood. Because I never realized that. So I thought that was a cool little tidbit about vampires. You got to have a specific type of wood. I don't know. So to round off my vampire episode, I hope you all enjoyed it. I tried to set a little bit of my vampire stuff here, although I do have behind me right here, I have like my entire Bram Stoker's Dracula collection. I have like everything Bram Stoker. I literally, everything from that movie that I could get my hands on is mine. The problem is I have like this obsessive personality when it comes to having toys. I just feel like if it has to do with what I'm interested in, I buy like everything I can find. It's like my husband and I, side note, are like obsessed with Smeargle, because it's a beagle in Pokemon, and he and I have like every single Smeargle card. We like literally go on eBay. Do we have that one? And then it just adds to our beagle collection of Smeargle. So, but yeah, I'll have to do an entire like little side thing for Patreon about my entire Dracula collection, because it's pretty awesome. I have some pretty cool books that are like kind of rare when it comes to Bram Stoker's Dracula, down to like the costuming books and everything. It's like it's my heart. I love that movie so much. But that's also probably why I'm super into vampires, because that movie came out when I was what? Oh my gosh, was that 91? I was maybe like 6 or 7, 8 years old when that came out. And just down to the costuming, the story, everything, the score, everything in that movie is like my favorite. I do not care. You cannot talk any bad about that movie, because it is like my favorite. Oh, so good. But yeah. Speaking of movies though, I did end up watching The Substance, which I thought was so good. I told my husband, I was like, listen, I have to do my end of 2024, all of my thriller, horror, sci-fi, TV shows, everything, like the recap. And I was like, I got a list of movies I still have to watch. And it's like, we got to get on this. And I had heard so many great things about The Substance, and I loved Demi Moore. And I was like, let's do it. And we both really enjoyed it. I thought it was so good. To me, it kind of had like elements of The Fly in it. I don't know why. I think that probably because of the end, but I really enjoyed it. I think The Substance is the only thing I've really watched recently. So I've been really bad. Like I said, I still have like a handful of movies I have to watch that are from 2024. I know I still need to watch Heretic. I need to watch Werewolves, which I was going to do a werewolf episode this month too, with werewolves coming out. So I need to do another werewolves episode because you all know I love werewolves too. So let's see. I know I'm going to go see Nosferatu. So I'm excited about that because also I love costuming. It's like one of my favorite things. If I had more time to actually sew, I would sew so much stuff. But I love costuming. So being able to see just these time period pieces, I'm like, yes, oh, my heart. So with that being said, I do plan on doing a Christmas episode, so I'm very excited about that. So stay tuned for that. And then I also plan on doing on January 1st, because it lands on a Wednesday, so perfect. I'm going to be doing my 2024 horror, thriller, and TV show recap for the entire year on my favorites of the year. There have been so many good ones, and I am so excited to just chat about how many great movies dropped this year. I was so excited. This year was a great year for horror. I mean, whether it was Late Night for the Devil, The First Omen, so many good movies. I loved The First Omen. I'm a huge like demon girl, so I love that. That's kind of like my schedule for the rest of the year and going into the new year, because I can't believe it's already going to be January. Like, what is going on, y'all? I'm like so confused on how time is flying. Like, what? But yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed my little recap of two of my favorite vampires or people associated with vampirism, Blood Countess Elizabeth Bathory, and then Count of Saint Germain. You can't go wrong with the Count of Saint Germain, and I hope y'all enjoyed it. And I hope this inspired y'all to go find some cool vampire stories, and then maybe inspire me to tell more vampire stories, because I could do like an entire season just on vampires, and I'm so sorry that I'm so corny, but this is who I am. But yeah, other than that, I hope y'all are having an amazing, amazing holiday season. I hope wherever you are in this world, you are staying warm and you are cozy and cuddly and getting lots of good food and drinking some apple cider and staying warm and cozy for the holidays. And here at Camp Cryptid, I'm always wishing y'all the best and happiest times. And I really want to thank y'all so much for allowing me to just sit here and chat about the weirdness that is Count of Saint Germain and Elizabeth Bathory. I really get excited to actually like have a reason to be like, no, I have to read this book on him. Like, this is my work. I have to. It's just really fun. And it really, honestly, it gives me such a break from like the stresses of life. And like I said, thanks again to everybody so much for stopping by the Merry Krampus. It was amazing to see everybody, and I can't wait to do more events in 2025. I know right now I'm working on C2E2 in Chicago. I have Loveland Frogman Festival that I'll actually be a speaker at. So if you're into cryptids, Loveland Frogman Festival here, that's probably about 20 minutes outside of Cincinnati. I'll be a speaker at that. So I can't wait to chat about the world of podcasting and paranormal stuff. So I'm really excited about that. So yeah, if you're around the area, come to Loveland Frogman Festival in March. It's going to be a great time, and I'm very excited about that. And I'm also very excited about C2E2 in Chicago. Chicago is one of my absolute favorite cities in the entire world, and I love me some pizza. I love me some deep dish pizza. I do not care. I love it. Now I'm hungry. Now I'm hungry. But yeah, I want to say thanks so much again, everybody, for hanging out for another episode. It's just an absolute joy to talk to y'all, and it means the world to me. Like when I do events and y'all come up and say that you like my podcast, it like literally brings tears to my eyes. I'm like almost tearing up right now thinking about it. But it just really, it really means the world to me. So thank you. So thank you for blessing my life with liking my podcast. And if you hate it, it's okay. I still appreciate you for listening and giving it a try. So, but yeah, with that being said, I just hope y'all are having an amazing holiday season, and I'll be dropping the Christmas special, the holiday special next week. And I want to thank you all so much for being just the best damn campers in the world. So thank you. It's so awesome. But yeah, with that being said, have an amazing, amazing rest of your week. And until next time, take care.